It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I will be your host this morning. Glad to have you on board. If you're joining us live on our website, glad to have you. Of course, you can always find our program at americasvoicenow.org. You can either listen to it on audio or video, your preference. I see a whole ton of folks out there this morning. I'm glad to see you guys out there in Roxborough. Not quite sure where that is. Looks like someplace in Maryland. Somerville. Not quite sure where Somerville is either. Let's see. Wills Point, Sioux Falls, Lincoln. I see Albuquerque out there. Mission Viejo. I see a number of folks down there in Texas and in Florida area. Again, Chicago and the upper Midwest. Glad to have you guys on board. If not, and you're catching us on Patriot FB, that's great news. If you're listening to us on the Rooster, this is pre-recorded, so you will not be able to interact live with the program. But you're always welcome to catch us live, 8 to 10 a.m. Central Time on America's Voice Now. We're going to cover 4 different topics this morning, which is our normal process, if you will. And I post this stuff up on our Facebook page and up on our YouTube, or up on our website and up on Patriot FB, so that you have an idea of what the show topics are for a given day. And today we're going to cover the topic of a teachers' union contract that blatantly exposes their prejudice. I mean, wait until you hear the amazing violation of basically the law in a contract. It's illegal for a contract to break the law in a contract. You cannot have a document that is of the law that violates the law while attempting to enforce some portion of an agreement between people. I mean, you and I cannot go out and create an agreement and a contract in writing that says we're going to go rob a bank together and you're going to drive the getaway car and I'm going to hold the gun. Not an enforcer. I mean, we can do that. But if we bring it before the court and I say, Your Honor, he didn't drive the getaway car, he ran away, and that's why I got caught, they're not going to give me dispensation from going to jail for that. I mean, it's incredible. Anyway, there's a teachers' union agreement out there that says special consideration will be given to non-Christians and racial minorities. Now, that's a violation of non-Christian or Christians and non-Christians, frankly, and their right to be under equal treatment under the law. And secondarily, a preferential consideration that is given to racial minorities is a violation of the law under anti-prejudice rules. So I don't get it, and I don't understand how a union could actually be stupid enough to put that in writing. I also don't understand why the American people are not smart enough to go after them in court and fight that, irrespective of how much the Justice Department would jump to their defense, which brings it to light a whole nother argument of why is the government supporting and defending a private company, but whatever. Our second topic is going to be the GOP and Democrats have the exact same goals, namely your enslavement. And that brings to mind an article which I found on FT.com about the rise of the surprising rise of the Republican Party, and another one by CNSnews.com of Republicans say not what they're running against, but not what they're running for. And the reason that this is an issue is because as we come forward into 2014 in the elections, it's apparent, or it should be apparent to anyone, that neither party represents us anymore. They now represent themselves in the parties. And I don't know about you, but I didn't swear allegiance to some party. I don't say I pledge allegiance to the Republican Party of the United States of America. I didn't say I pledge allegiance to the Democrats of America and to the goals and aspirations and agenda to which they subscribe. Did you? Our third topic is going to be Media Shield. The law that Chuck Schumer has been trying to get passed rears its unconstitutional head of snakes. And I say that because this is a complete and utter abuse of our system of government. When you have a law that is about to be passed by senators, which says that if you're not a journalist, you don't have First Amendment rights, and your right of Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate yourself has been stripped from you, the vote, if it's held, is out-and-out treason. First Amendment rights aren't granted to you by the government. Those who foolishly believe that government can limit or delegate them are simply damn fools, with no regard to wisdom or knowledge of history. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth. You can ignore the history of our founding at your own peril, and mine, because God only knows if they'll qualify me as a journalist, or your other favorite talk show hosts, or your favorite other article writers or authors or publishers. If you think the Ministry of Propaganda is twisted now, just wait until this little tidbit of tyranny takes hold, and it's going to hang on like a pit bull. The truth is that we are under no obligation to follow those laws, which are unconstitutional, on their face. Our fourth topic is going to be a brand new term which I have coined. It's called Copoldiers. It's a new term for the police state. It's a term that will represent accurately the people involved. They're not cops. They're not soldiers. They're Copoldiers. And basically, what we have is a nation that has now become a paramilitary police state. We have the equivalent of the brown shirts of the Nazi era living amongst us. We have them on a national level. We have them on a state level. We have them on a regional and a local level. And you're just unaware of it or unwilling to admit the truth. These people come armed to the teeth, and they botch raids constantly. They kill innocent people. More Americans have been killed by Copoldiers since 9/11 than have been killed in Iraq. So let's understand what we're talking about here. The number of Americans that have been killed in paramilitary police raids by law enforcement and by law enforcement in general serving warrants and what have you exceeds the total number of U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq. And it almost exceeds the total number of U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a national epidemic on our hands. And no one's talking about it. Shh. We're not going to talk about it. Because if we do, the truth will be out. DHS has become that which we abhor. An armed military in our presence on our domestic homeland. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth. And everything else you hear to the contrary is a bald-faced lie. Copoldiers are killing Americans. Guilty and innocent alike. They have absolutely zero regard for truth. All right, let's break into our first topic this morning. We are going to discuss the teachers' union deal. This is posted up on our Facebook page. You can find that by going to facebook.com/America's Voice Now. That's facebook.com/America's Voice Now. You can also find every program that we do on our podcast service, which is run by Spreaker. And if you would be so kind, I would appreciate it if you would click the like button on Spreaker, or follow, the follow button, I should say, because that enables us to gather enough listeners that we can get onto iHeartRadio, which will dramatically improve and expand our program. All right, so there's a teachers union deal out there, which in a Michigan school district, which this was originally extended until the year 2017, and it specifically discriminates against Christians, white people, and men. And it does so in the actual very text of the contract itself. I mean, again, you cannot create a contract that's if I drew up a contract, an employment contract, that said, you can only be hired in this company if you're white. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the outrage? Can you imagine the national media coverage that would descend on that employer? This is the Ferndale Public School. First of all, the fact that it's a public school ought to create outrage nationwide, because here you have a contract on a public school forum sponsored, created, and developed by a union, and it establishes that non-Christians, racial minorities, and women receive special priority in the hiring decisions. Now, this is an affirmative action. I mean, you could get away with that, even though the Supreme Court has given every indication that they want to step away from affirmative action and they want to eliminate it. They realize that affirmative action was a mistake, and rather than admit their mistake, which would be the right thing to do, what they have done is they've said, we believe the time for affirmative action is gone by us. In other words, it's past, and it's no longer helpful. The truth is, affirmative action is a bad idea, just like prohibition was a bad idea. But anyway, this agreement gives special consideration to women and or minorities defined as Native American, Asian American, Latino, African American, and those of non-Christian faith. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the actual verbiage in their text. That is the contract statement itself in quotes. I'm going to give it to you again, because you should be outraged. In fact, every teacher in the nation, every school system, every citizen, and every media outlet should be throwing flags on this place so that they fly in the air like confetti after a Super Bowl. Quote, special consideration shall be given to women and or minorities defined as Native American, Asian American, Latino, African American, and those of the non-Christian faith. Now, the Daily Caller is where this originally came out, and they went to the Mackinac Center and said, hey, what's up with this deal you guys have here? And the district immediately opted to remove the language from their contracts. Really? So a spokesman for the school district told the the Daily Caller that the language was antiquated. I'm sorry, that's a complete and open violation of the law. It's not antiquated. It exposes and expresses the current mentality of the left and the liberal progressive media and the liberal progressive attitudes of unions and the school systems in general. Because they don't want individuals who will openly expose and point out what's going on in our school systems, including the treason of Common Core. And it is treason. If you haven't recently looked on our website or on our Facebook page, I would encourage you to do so. And the reason I say that is because we, and I have a lot of other folks that post stuff up on our Facebook page for me because it's just too much for one person to handle. But there was a recent article, or a number of different posts about items that were up on Common Core right out of their workbooks. And we have stuff that's posted up all the time about this. But one of them, in particular, really should have made it clear to everyone exactly how treasonous Common Core really is. And I use the word treason because I intend to. You see, the real reality of Common Core is that it is a very, very dangerous treasonous statement. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give you an example. This is right out of a workbook from Common Core, and they're referencing the Bill of Rights, and they're talking about how they're summarizing what the Bill of Rights is. Now, the truth is, any school worth its salt wouldn't summarize and paraphrase the Bill of Rights any more than you would paraphrase what a biblical passage says. I mean, it's one thing to use it in a quote, while you're a pastor up on a pulpit, and you say, hey, what this passage says is this, and you paraphrase it. But even pastors read straight from the book. Here's what it says on the Bill of Rights related to the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. If this doesn't throw you into a tizzy, nothing will. It says, this amendment states that people have the right to certain weapons, providing that they register them and they have not been in prison. The founders included this amendment to prevent the United States from acting like the British, who had tried to take weapons away from the colonists. Okay. Now look, there's nothing right about that except the date that they have on it of 1791. Everything else is wrong. This amendment states that people have the right to certain weapons. First of all, shall not be infringed actually outshines the phrase certain weapons, and it exposes it as an absolute lie. Providing that they register them and they have not been in prison. Show me anywhere in the Second Amendment where it references that you may have certain weapons only, and or that you have not been in prison. It doesn't say that anywhere. In fact, our founders stated very clearly that no free man shall be denied the right to bear arms. Now, if you have completed a sentence in prison and you are free, then you are a free man. And if you are not a free man, and by virtue of the fact that you have committed a felony in the past, then you should either be locked up for life or you have to be given your gun back. In fact, prior to the 1968 Gun Control Act, when you left prison, you were given your gun back. For the record, the rate of recidivism of those who were given their gun back was extremely low. Nowhere near the rate of recidivism today, but that's because back then people were held accountable for their actions. Now, I defy anyone listening to this broadcast to find any spot where it says that, one, you're entitled to have certain weapons, not others, and secondly, that it is only providing that you register them and that you have not been in prison. Where does it say registration in the Second Amendment? How do you get registration out of shall not be infringed? Are the two not diametrically opposed statements? I thought so. The second sentence is, the Founding Fathers included this amendment to prevent the United States from acting like the British, who had tried to take weapons away from the colonists. Well, with all due respect, anyone worth their salt would immediately recognize that is a misstatement and a lie. The United States was not doing this so that the government would not take weapons away from the colonists. They did this so that we would have the right to fight back against our own government when it became obvious to all of us that it was operating in tyrannical fashion. Those of you who have not recognized and done something about the fight against Common Core, you have abdicated your responsibility to your children, and that's on you. You see, words matter, folks, and when you've got a contract from a school board that says that the contract is specifically designed to remove from the running a certain group of people, that, ladies and gentlemen, is beyond comprehension. I mean, the Civil Rights Act doesn't say only minorities are entitled to civil rights. I mean, if you want to talk about equality, which seems to be the new catchphrase of the day with the tyrants in office right now, then you have to recognize that it doesn't necessarily mean and only mean that minorities get special dispensation. Is that not true? The truth is that when you have a phrase in there that says special consideration shall be given to women and or minorities defined as Native American, Asian American, Latino, African American, and those of the non-Christian faith. Did we forget about Icelanders? Are they entitled to special consideration? Oh, well, they're white. That's the problem, I see. The spokesman for the school board said, we submitted this language to our legal counsel and it is being removed from the contracts. The district does not discriminate. That's a lie. The truth is, don't tell me that their legal counsel doesn't review these contracts. They do all the time. Nobody picked it up until the media did? Well, if that's the legal counsel that you have, then may I submit that your legal counsel should be fired and new legal counsel obtained. Because clearly you are discriminating. The article goes on to say, as written, it seems that the contract violates several laws. You're kidding. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Michigan voters passed a constitutional amendment prohibiting the consideration of race in public contracts and university admissions. With all due respect, we didn't really, in Michigan, we really didn't need a constitutional amendment that prohibits that. But, okay. The law is currently being adjudicated by the U.S. Supreme Court, and experts expect that it will be upheld. Why a law that is a state constitutional amendment that prohibits consideration of race in public contracts and university admissions is being adjudicated by the Supreme Court is beyond my comprehension as well, because the truth of the matter is the Supreme Court is not the final arbiter of the Constitution, and if one state wants to make a law that says we reaffirm human rights and civil rights that no one can be discriminated against, that would be that state's right. And the Supreme Court has no say in the matter. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we are going to tackle our second topic, and this one's a doozy. GOP and Democrats have the same exact goals: your enslavement. We're going to talk about it because the truth is nobody can point to the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats anymore. The Republicans can't even draw the division line. You know why? Because there is none. There is no difference. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Please find us live on the web at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. You can also find each and every program that we do hosted up on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. You can listen to the program live on Patriot FB by going to patriotfb.com. You can become a member there. It's kind of like a Facebook clone for Patriots, and it's a great place to visit. I'm sure that you'll appreciate it. Okay, when we return, you can also contact me, by the way, direct at mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. We'll return in just a moment. That groove. You know, we got a vast audience of middle America that listens to this program, and not everybody appreciates that kind of groove. A lot of folks more into the country thing, but this piece was written for me by a kid in Romania, of all places. And he's allowed me to copyright it for the show. But I like it, and this is my show, and so Therefore, I can pretty much play any piece I like. Because it's mine, I can do it if I want. If you don't like it, you only got to listen to it for about, 30 seconds in the beginning and end of each segment. So there's an article this morning out in cnsnews.com and another one out there by FT, which for whatever reason they are they won't let you copy a link from their website and post it up on yours, even though you give full attribution, which I always do. But whatever. In FT's article, they talk about the amazing and stunning fact that Republicans and republicanism, I shouldn't say Republicans, but republicanism is on the rise again in the United States. In other words, the pendulum is swinging back, and they can't quite grasp the concept of why. Well, the truth is actually quite easy to understand. The problem is, and the reason that we have a split here in what Republicans actually stand for is because there's a lot of folks that are stuck on the mantra that, Republicans represent some aspect of the political beliefs and agendas of the average person. That's not the truth. The problem is that Republicans are actually running for the same things as the Democrats. And they can't articulate another way to befuddle the masses. When you have the article for CNS News, which is a great website, by the way, if you want an awesome alternative media site to go to that separates you from the Fox Newses and the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and all those papers, and the CNN and normal media, CNS News, that's Charlie November Sierra News.com, is a great place to go. While we're talking about websites that you can visit, by the way, PRC News is an excellent site. PRC News is put out by the Property Rights Coalition, and it's P like Papa, PRC, Peter Romeo Charlie, Papa Romeo Charlie, news.org. You'll find all kinds of great news articles posted up there as well. But what they're talking about here in this article is Republicans say what they're running against, but not what they're running for. And the reason is because if they ever truly exposed themselves for what they were running for, it would be clearly evident to everyone that the end game of all of this nonsense is the same. Your enslavement. I mean, they're not... Look, both parties are looking for the same exact goal. Your capitulation, dependency, and enslavement. Your dependency upon government and them for your livelihood, your permission to operate, act. The truth is, the Republican Party has not figured out a way that they can describe a better way to... You remember the old phrase, if you can't dazzle them with your brilliance, baffle them with your BS. You remember that phrase? Well, the problem is that we've now reached the point at which, if you look at it on the curve, the two parties have actually converged. I mean, they're no longer parallel. Think of it like a highway that's divided by, an island, right? And that highway, the delineation between the two lanes is very clear. It's divided by this, big, broad swath of grass. But at some point in time, when you get out of the urban areas and you get into the more rural locations, or they have a little less highway area to build on, suddenly those two lanes begin to converge. They begin to come closer together. And at some point in time, the island gets narrower and narrower and narrower, and suddenly it evaporates or disappears, and you've got, 4 lanes that are now side by side, separated only by a piece of paint. That is exactly where we are. They are running for the same thing. And the Republicans cannot figure out, for the life of them, another way to phrase their treason against America. And it is treason. You cannot hide it, ladies and gentlemen, when it is so blatant and obvious and apparent to anyone with eyes that want to see, with ears that want to hear, with a nose that chooses to smell the smoke and the flame as it licks at our feet. The agendas are the same, and the end goals are identical. Your subjugation, your dependency, and your ultimate enslavement. It's not a matter of pointing out differences because there are no differences. We've reached the end of the line where one philosophy can be separated from the other. From this point on, all of you are put on notice that both are enemies of the people. And now you know it. You can no longer sit idle and say, I just wasn't aware. You are aware. FT says the strange revival of Republican America. Au contraire, it is not so strange. The liberal media, a.k.a. the Ministry of Propaganda, they would like for you to believe that the myth of the national movement is progressive in its thinking. It's not. Yes, on the left coast and on the right coast, there are, and frankly, in the urban areas, there are pockets. There are pockets in progressive thinking. But the rest of the nation, which includes the vast majority of the center of the country and some large pockets that are intermixed in both coasts and the major urban areas, is conservative fiscally and independently liberal socially. What does that mean? Well, they are fiscally conservative. Everybody, even the progressives, are worried about our debt. The only people that aren't are those who are spending it. But everybody else is rightly concerned about it. So they are conservative fiscally in the sense that we all know that we're being taxed to death and that we are no longer represented by any level of independence from that debt. On the liberal social aspect of things, many Americans believe that, quite frankly, the aspects of society are those that the areas that society has expressed concern about. Most people don't really have that great a concern. I mean, when we talk about socially liberal, what are we talking about? Well, most people are not for gay marriage. But they really don't care who you sleep with. They just don't want to make it replace the institution of marriage. And you can't blame them for that. I mean, if you ask the average American, do they care whether or not you're gay? The average person says, look, it's none of my business who you sleep with. You do what you want. I don't agree with it. I don't believe in it, but it's not my place to tell you what to do. But I don't want you to taint, if you will, the institution of marriage. And that is, in large part, the way most Americans perceive the LBGT, or whatever you want to call it, movement. Now, there is a radical group on both sides, of course, and then there are pockets of ultra-liberalism in major urban areas and on both coasts. But the truth of the matter is, the Americans who were never polled for their opinion are in the majority here. But we're being led around like bulls with a ring through our nose by candidates in both the Republican and the Democrat Party who, quite frankly, are cowing and bowing to the ultra minorities on either side. Most Americans look at marijuana and look at drugs and say, well, we don't necessarily think that they should all be legalized. We don't necessarily also believe that people should be spending decades in jail and that the entire society should be hampered by the cost of imprisoning and criminalizing our citizenry. Most people are smart enough to recognize that when you make something forbidden, it makes it that much more of an enticement. When you look at guns as the rule, the average American, the vast majority, I might add, of Americans say, we know, even though I don't personally own one, that guns are for the benefit of the protection of the nation as a whole from a government out of control. And as they see more and more and more overreach, they become more and more convinced of the fact that there really ought to be a Second Amendment unhampered, unmolested. Now, do they speak up on that regard? No, generally they don't. They don't speak up on all the other things either, because the vast majority is asleep. The truth of the matter is, most of the country is not ultra-liberal or ultra-conservative. The majority of the country pretty much has the attitude of, just leave me alone. Now, you could take that and point to it and say, that is an ultra-conservative principle. And it is, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they agree with the ultra-conservatives on everything. I mean, I saw a guy post on my Facebook page the other day a comment about guns, and I would disagree with him wholeheartedly, and he's a follower. He says, he was talking about Georgia legislators passed the most extreme gun bill ever. He says, I support most of this. The felon part is a no-brainer. Convicted of a felony, can't own a gun, period. Well, I wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think, and I know our founders thought, because I've read it from their mouths, and I'll give it to you if you want it. I just read it to you last week, that no free man is disbarred or prohibited from the ownership of weapons. Now, if you've served your time in prison and whatever you've done wrong, assuming it was a legitimate crime, and there's lots and lots of folks out there that are felons for things that many of us would agree shouldn't have been a crime in the first place. But arguing the fact that felons are prohibited from owning a gun, period, is foolishness. It's stupidity. There is no prohibition, legal or otherwise, that states that a felon can't own a gun. If you do not get your rights back, then no matter what the crime, your felony is a life sentence. And a life sentence automatically falls to the Eighth Amendment of cruel and unusual punishment. Secondarily, it's not just a limitation on the felon, it's a limitation on the felon's entire family. Because anyone who lives within the premise of that felon cannot own a firearm either. Their rights are restricted. Prohibited to them, in fact. Why? Because they don't want their family member to be placed back in prison on a charge of having access to a weapon. And so, therefore, their rights are retracted. So, my point to Mr. Barusa is, if your wife was a felon and you were prohibited from owning a firearm, is that fair? Should your right to defend your household when your son or your wife or your daughter is a felon override your ability to have a weapon? I don't think it's as cut and dried as you'd like it to be. See, the truth is that all of these laws are an overriding abuse of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is not subject to manipulation. It's not subject to interpretation, especially by a group of black-robed tyrants who have, for all intents and purposes, completely abdicated any aspect of their right or their duty or their obligation to stand up and stop the tyranny that's happening in our nation every day. You can't come up with enough arguments and justification to say the court doesn't have an obligation to stand up and stop this. They do. The design of the government was that each of the three members, or the three prongs, if you will, of the trident form of government, would stand to keep the others in check. Now, the judicial portion can say it's not our place. But that's a fallacy. That's abdicating their responsibility, and it's quite frankly treasonous on their part to refuse to stop it. You know, I've heard the Supreme Court actually say, we don't think it's our place to get in an argument difference between the executive and the legislative. I disagree. I disagree wholeheartedly. I could not disagree more. It is your obligation to do that. When the government overreaches, whether it be the legislative or the executive, and reaches within or inside the domain of one of the other divisions, or it overreaches completely, and the legislature, as we now know, are completely helpless to stop it, then it is the judicial's obligation to step up and do something. The truth is, we're not seeing a strange revival of the Republican concept of government in America. We're seeing the fact that the progressives are surprised about it, that the pendulum has reached the apex of its swing, and it is now headed the other way. The truth is that the vast majority of Americans have said, we think this has gone far enough. Now, are they yet ready to take action? No. Has the damage been done? Yes. Is that damage so great that the pendulum may be stopped in mid-return? Absolutely. The myth that the media would have you believe is that once the country begins to go a certain way, it will continue inevitably to go that way. That's not true. It's a myth. They would have you believe that the nation is a majority of ultra-liberal progressive lefties. It just isn't true. They may be easily misled by both parties. The nation may be coming apart at the seams because they've been, for all intents and purposes, bribed into dependency. But ultimately, they know that they are following a path of utter destruction. What is the true course for America? Let me make it clear. The true course for this nation is to stick to what our Constitution and our founders gave us as a guide. And if we do that, we cannot go wrong. If we utilize our Constitution and we apply the clear and defined statements that our founders gave us to express the reasons, the whys, the hows, the ifs, the ands, and the purposes of what our Constitution was drafted to design, then we cannot go wrong. It's like following a map. We've been given a map. We've been told where to go. And we've been told that if we stay on this path, we are safe. When we take side trips off the path, when we step off the path, when we leave that clear and defined direction, when we deviate, the results speak for themselves. Look at the results of the deviations that we've taken. We've taken the deviation on fiscal issues. We allowed a central bank to rule our nation. I mean, the the foolishness of that is clearly expressed. Alexander Hamilton said the tendency of a national bank to increase public and private credit. The tendency of a national bank is to increase public and private credit. The former gives power to the state. for the protections of its rights and interests, and the latter facilitates and extends the operations of commerce among individuals. A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberties of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. That was Thomas Jefferson. Here he says it again. That was that was earlier on. In a later statement, he made it very clear in 1802. And he said, I believe that banking institutions are far more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation and then by deflation, the banks and corporations that will grow up around will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Hey guys, what part of that didn't you grasp as a guide rule? That is a very clear and defined statement. He wasn't mincing words about it and saying, well, you might think about a central bank, but here's the implications. He said to allow a central bank is more dangerous than a standing army. And speaking of standing armies, that brings to mind the argument of the Department of Homeland Security. What the heck are they doing? Well, we're going to talk about that in our segment related to the Copoldiers, who have, for all intents and purposes, infiltrated our nation and turned us into a police state. The truth is, if we simply stick to the Constitution and the pathway that our founders gave us as a guide, we cannot go wrong. When we deviate from that path, the results speak for themselves. The war on poverty, the war on drugs, all of that is turned into a mantle, an excuse, a cloak for tyranny. Nothing more, ladies and gentlemen. All right, we're going to take a break. When we return, we are going to tackle our third topic of this morning, and that will be Media Shield, the new Media Shield law that's being pushed by Chuck the poophead Schumer, rears its unconstitutional head of snakes again. This, ladies and gentlemen, is just another expose of tyranny. And he now says that the Senate has the votes for this Media Shield law. Nothing could be more dangerous to our republic than this. We'll be back in just a minute. You're listening to America's Voice Now. If you would be so kind, I would greatly appreciate it if you would make sure that you work with our sponsors. Please see our friends over at Battery Station, where you can visit them at batterystation.com, or you can call them at 417-257-7799. Please visit our friends over at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Not any Pizza Hut, just this Pizza Hut, because these are the guys who support you. They are located on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and on Tuesdays, they have reduced price lunch, and then at night, they have kids eat free as family night. And also on Thursdays, they have reduced price lunch as well. If you have a legal challenge in your life, whether it be civil or criminal, please contact the law offices of Jason Henry. He is capable of handling all of those, whether they be state and or federal issues, and he would greatly love to be able to assist you. You can reach him at 417-256-4100. Again, that's 417-256-4100. Lastly, visit our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop. They're located on the square in West Plains, and you can swing in there and get any kind of tobacco product that you're interested in. You can call them, and they do ship across the country. 417-257-1776. 417-257-1776. Last but not least, Wits End Classic Barbershop, where I get my hair cut. He does a great job for $10. You can't beat that with a lead pipe. Wits End Classic Barbershop, where you can get a great haircut every day of the week except for Monday and Sunday. You can call them if you need to at 417-372-2027. We'll be back in just a moment.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host this morning, and we are in our third of 4 segments. So glad to have you on board. Hope that you're catching us live on our website. Boy, I see a whole bunch of folks up there in the upper northeast. Let's see. I've got folks up there in Buffalo, the mighty Buffalo, New York. Erie. It's Erie, Pennsylvania, I'm guessing. Farmington Hills. That's in the Michigan area. Always glad to have you guys on board. Liberty and Independence. And I see Haymarket. And I wasn't kidding about Liberty and Independence. Boy, that's in the heart of the country, right? And they know exactly where they should be thinking. Haymarket, I'm not sure where that is. It looks like it's down in Maryland someplace. There's a number of places where you can capture the show and catch it live, including on our own website at americasvoicenow.org, where you can catch it in either audio or video. And if you miss an episode, you can catch it on our website, on our YouTube channel, where we have a post up, a little thumbnail where you can click it and just listen or watch. You also have a great option to use our Listen Line. Our Listen Line is a totally free service to you. It's a toll call, but you can call it at any time and get that entire day's program anytime at your convenience. The phone number for that Listen Line is area code 415-325-0725. That's 415-325-0725. The beauty of that Listen Line is that if you're on the road, if you're traveling, if you are outside of our terrestrial radio area, or you don't have access to the internet, you can simply call that phone number and listen to an entire program. You get the whole 100 minutes played at your convenience, your time slot, the whole 9 yards. There's even some controls on there so you can move around forward and back and that kind of thing. I encourage you to do so because that Listen Line is provided to us free of charge by a company called Audio Now, and they are an outstanding group that has made this service available to us, and it's called their Radio Over Telephone Listen Line. So, again, it's 415-325-0725. So, we're going to cover this topic in reference to the Media Shield Law that Chuck Schumer and Dianne Feinstein have been promoting. And the reason that I'm concerned about this is because it is clearly an abuse of the First Amendment right against free speech. Now, it sounds like it makes sense because they're talking here about, what the NSA was doing by spying and the Department of Justice was doing by spying on the Associated Press and Fox News' James Rosen and stuff like that. But I got to tell you, that's not what it's really about. Like everything that the government does, they give it a name that is completely in diametric opposition to its real intent. There's no shield for the media in here. What they're basically saying is that if you're covered under the Media Shield Law, you can't be forced to give up your source. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, and that's the carrot. You haven't seen the club coming behind it that is the size of a light pole on a highway that's about to clobber you. Because what it's telling you is that if you are in the media and you are not a member of one of the national media chains, you don't have any civil rights, you don't have any First Amendment and free speech protections. And the purpose behind this is not to protect the likes of the Associated Press or James Rosen or Fox News. The purpose of this is to silence alternative media. Make no mistake about it. Your senator should be notified immediately that any move to support this and or vote in favor of it will be considered an open, blatant act of treason on his or her part. Did you hear what I just said? It's an open and blatant act of treason because it clearly separates those people from the media, from the remainder of society. And I cannot find anywhere in the First Amendment that says you have no right of free speech unless you're a member of the media. The way they couch it here in the Associated Press is even more troublesome because what I find the most disturbing about this is that the Associated Press is one of the examples they name about how they were, the Department of Justice subpoenaed a bunch of phone records from the AP and so forth and so on. And here's their article on it. They failed to protect us while simultaneously kind of applauding their own protection, which I find to be treasonous on its own. In other words, they're not pointing out the fact that this strips everybody else, except them, of protections. A supporter of a bill to protect reporters in the news media from having to reveal confidential sources said Friday the measure has the backing of the Obama administration and the support of enough senators to move ahead this year. Okay. First of all, if it has the backing of the Obama administration, you can bet your bottom dollar it is not good for America. I just said it, and I meant it. If this guy, who is an illegal alien, a violator of tons of laws, the repeated violator of our Constitution, and a man who is actively and openly working to destroy the United States of America from the inside out, supports it, then you cannot not and call yourself an American patriot. Not and call yourself intellectually honest. Chuck Schumer, he speaks optimistically about the prospects for the measure. Well, of course he does. It's his measure. The article says, while the First Amendment protects freedom of the press, quote, there is no First Amendment right for gathering information, says Chuck Schumer. Oh, I disagree. It doesn't say anywhere in the First Amendment that, and listen, this is more of the same kind of nonsense that we've seen where these people take the interpretation of a constitutional statement in the Bill of Rights and they attempt to interpret it with a twist for their own purposes. There is no First Amendment right for gathering information. No, it doesn't say that. But by the same token, it doesn't need to say that. It's a given. You don't sit there and say that the press has the right to report, but no way to gather information. I mean, that's like saying, well, you have the right to drive, but you can't put your foot on the gas pedal. What's the point? The bill was killed off last year after disclosure that the Justice Department had secretly subpoenaed almost 2 months' worth of telephone calls from 21 phone lines used by the Associated Press, and they secretly obtained a search warrant to obtain emails of a Fox News journalist. They neglect to point out that they also captured his parents' phone calls and emails. But then the bill got a lot of pushback, and looked like it got buried, and enough senators snuck away from it that it wasn't going to get passed. Now it's back with a vengeance, and Schumer has been out there doing some kind of dirty dealing in the background, along with Harry Reid, applying whatever kind of misanthropic abuse they can to these other senators to get them to vote for it. Schumer discussed the bill's provisions and how, if it became law, it would affect it might affect journalist Glenn Greenwald, who reported on the NSA's secret surveillance. Schumer says, it's probably not enough protections to cover him, but it's better than current law. So this is Chuck Schumer saying this law would leave Greenwald open to some kind of prosecution simultaneous, and it won't cover him, but it's better than the current law. He's not obligated under the current law either. ladies and gentlemen, you know, this is like a guy who says, I believe so strongly in the Second Amendment that I agree that we should not take away your single-shot .22, but we have the right to take away every other gun. Show me the justification for that. As if that's the choice. As if the choice for you is suicide or death by someone else's hand. I mean, give me the reason as to how, the logic, the rationale as to how that is done. Here's the worst part. The bill will only cover and only apply to covered journalists. Okay, here's where it gets ugly, because this is how the traitors in Congress betray you, and then the courts give it their blessing. The only way that you'd be covered and protected from being able to expose information, including about your own government, is if you are defined as an employee or an independent contractor or an agent of an entity that disseminates news or information. Interestingly enough, bloggers are left out. The individual would have to be employed for 1 year within the last 20 or their article here says that within the last 20 or 3 months within the last 5 years. I think what they mean, you'd have to be employed for 1 year within the last 20 years or 3 months within the last 5 years. But the point is that you have to be employed by a news or information entity that is pre-approved by them. It would also cover student journalists who are under the tutelage, of course, of the Ministry of Propaganda, or someone with a considerable amount of freelance work in the last 5 years. All right, what is considerable? Because if what you're going to tell me is that now it's up to a judge to make that determination, I tell you treason is in the air. And it just goes exactly to say a federal judge would have the discretion to declare an individual a covered journalist who would now be granted the privileges of the law. Ladies and gentlemen, you got to be kidding me. That's like sitting there and saying, you can own a gun as long as the judge says you've got a legitimate reason. All it takes is one bad judge to block an entire segment of the population. Tell me where that's justifiable. Tell me the rationale. Give me the constitutional foundation. Give it to me now. Come on. It doesn't exist. The bill goes on to say that information is only privileged if it is disseminated by a news medium, which they describe as a newspaper, a nonfiction book, a wire service, a news agency, a news website, mobile application, or other news or information service, whether distributed digitally or otherwise. News program, magazine, or other periodical, whether in print, electronic, or other format, or through television or radio broadcast, or motion picture for public showing. It draws the line on Twitter, draws the line on blogging, and other social media that's written by non-journalists. So let me ask you this. It says that all of these organizations, these newspapers, wire services, and news agencies, news websites, so that means that they're covering places like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Tribune, the Miami Herald, the LA Times, right? Okay. Didn't all of those places start in somebody's basement somewhere, or a garage? I mean, Fox News only came into being in the late 90s. So how long was it before Fox was a legitimate news organization? Was it 3 months of operation? Was it 12 months of operation? Breitbart came into being a couple of years ago. When did it become legitimate? Is it legitimate, or is it still persona non grata? So, does this also bar a guy like that young college guy who goes out with his camera and exposes stuff like Acorn? We don't know. And it's up to a judge to make that determination. So what that means is that they can get you in their grasp and beat you to death by financial attrition, by basically making you go to court and defend yourself for the right to have First Amendment free speech. That's treason, folks. Period. End of argument. End of discussion. There's nothing further to say. And if your senator votes for it, he should be charged with treason, removed from office, and labeled what? What's the word? Well, what do they say when you've been removed from the military for actions that would be unbecoming of a person who's taken their oath? It's called dishonorably discharged. And with that label, you can never run for office again. With that label, you are worse than a felon. You have no right to a job. You have no right to work in government. You have no right to dictate rules to anyone else. If your senator votes for this, you dishonorably discharge him by recall, or if you cannot get a recall and you don't want to wait for the next election, then you and your citizens in your state should march on your capital and remove him or her by physical means if necessary. Charge them with the crime of treason. If we citizens don't have the right to charge our treasonous alleged representatives, then who does? The truth is, if you have no protection unless they give it to you, what good is what's the purpose? What's the value of the First Amendment anymore? Is there any purpose to it? Because if it's now determined by someone else that your First Amendment rights only apply when they're given to you, what part of God-given right that's separated and unalienable from government's interference? I mean, explain it. It goes on here to say, the overall bill would protect reporters and news media organizations from being required to reveal the identities of confidential sources, but it does not grant an absolute privilege to journalists. The bill makes clear that before the government asks a news organization to divulge sources, it must first go to a judge who would supervise any subpoena or court order for information. Such orders would be limited, if possible, quote, in purpose, subject matter, and period of time covered, so as to avoid compelling disclosure of peripheral, non-essential, or speculative information. You see, here's the problem. Anytime you allow them, and I say them meaning the one, there's about 5 million traders in the country who are running everything, between bankers, the 1%ers, and who are actively, and I'm talking here about the Bill Gates of the world, right, and his ilk. And the millions upon millions of Americans who have sold us down the river for their own personal benefit because they're in government, they work in government, they run an agency, they're elected, or they're appointed, like in courts and judges. So 5 million people are basically betraying 310 million of us. Schumer was asked about how the bill would affect James Rosen, a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who has been battling government efforts to force him to testify in the trial of a CIA official accused of leaking information to him. And Schumer says, well, under our bill, Rosen would have his day in court. I'm sorry, but if whistleblowers' information is not protected, then we won't have whistleblowers anymore. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the entire point of this treasonous bill. Silence those who can tell the public what's really happening in government. WikiLeaks' Julian Assange would not be covered. He would not be considered a covered journalist. I don't know. Am I a covered journalist? I don't know. But I can tell you this, I don't have $50,000 or $75,000 to go to court and find out. And that's the whole premise behind it. The vote is expected to be taken in April, which means it'll probably be taken in secret at 11 o'clock at night when nobody's looking, and all of your alleged representatives who don't want this on their plate will say, I can't make that vote, and they'll vote not present. The truth is, ladies and gentlemen, our nation and our Bill of Rights, there is not one single out of the 10 enumerated bills under the Bill of Rights, there is not one that has not been grossly violated. Grossly. And as long as we allow this to continue, we will go down the path of authoritarianism and totalitarianism. We are entering a tyrannical period in the history of the United States that someday, after a massive uprising of the American citizenry, will go down in history as the greatest treason ever perpetrated in the history of the United States of America. Not only by our elected representatives and the non-elected, but also by the people for allowing it to happen. Where do you stand, folks? When do you say enough is enough? We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we will talk about our final topic this morning, which is the Copoldiers. It's a brand new term for the police state. It's a merger of cops and soldiers. It's called Copoldiers. And I'm going to tell you why they are going to be used as the new authoritarian arm of force in the land of tyranny. This is no longer the home of the free and the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is now a land of open, blatant tyranny. We'll be back in just a minute. Please make sure that you visit and support our sponsors. These are the folks that keep this program up on the air every day, and we greatly appreciate them. We would like it, and I would like it, if you would do the same. You can visit Wits End Classic Barbershop in person and get yourself a great shave and a haircut. They also have that hot towel, lather shave with a straight razor in the old style. You can get down there and you can give them a call if you'd like. They don't require appointments, but you can get their hours at 417-372-2027. Also, our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, you can reach them by dialing 417-257-1776. They have hundreds and hundreds of cigars under wraps there, and they can ship around the country, as well as accessories, pipe tobacco, and all kinds of things. The law offices of Jason Henry. If you've got a legal problem, Jason's the guy to solve it for you. You can get a hold of him by calling 417-256-4100. 417-256-4100. State and federal cases. Make sure that you visit our friends at Pizza Hut. You can find them on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Not any Pizza Hut, just this Pizza Hut. You can find them on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and on Tuesdays and Thursdays, reduced price lunch, and Tuesday night, kids under 12 eat free for family night. And last but certainly not least, our friends at the Battery Station. You can reach them by getting a hold of them on the web at batterystation.com. That's batterystation.com. Or 417-257-7799. A great place to shop. We'll be back in just a minute. We're in the last leg of this journey this morning, guys. This is our final discussion this morning. We're going to talk about the new Copoldier army that is being armed to the teeth and how it is destroying our country. The set is being built on the stage. The props are being handed out to the actors. The curtain's about to rise, and the lights have dimmed in the lobby. If you don't smell a police state growing around you, if you don't feel the tendrils of the police state wrapped around not just your ankles anymore, not just your knees, not just your waist, but now wrapping themselves around your throat and beginning to cut off the wind, you're a fool. The instances of law enforcement who has now become a tyrannical and dangerous exigent threat to the United States of America are all too clear. Is our nation inhabited by cops or by soldiers? Well, the answer is quite frankly that we have a new designated entity. They're called the Copoldiers, and they are a merger of the two. They are a merger of the two that is dangerous for you and your family. The press and the media would, and they give you they give you the occasional sensational headline, but what they hide from you is the fact that they should be drawing the lines to allow you to see the overall picture, and they refuse to do that. Is it complacency? Is it cooperation? Is it assistance? Is it pressure? I don't know, nor do I care. I can tell you that the amount of information that's out there for you to see all of this is so available to you, so blatant, so obvious, that if you fail to see it, it's only because you choose not to look. I would like for you, and I'll put this up on our YouTube channel, but you can, in the body of the segment, but I would like for you to go to a website called cato.org/raid map. That's cato.org, cato.org/raid map. In this, you'll see a map, and it's a searchable map that talks about an epidemic of, quote, isolated incidents. These aren't isolated incidents. It's the vast overkill of the paramilitary law enforcement in the United States that is killing Americans willy-nilly like as if we were insurgents in a third world country. In fact, we've killed more Americans since 9/11 than we lost soldiers in Iraq, and almost as many soldiers as we lost in Afghanistan combined. By the time this president leaves office, we will have lost more American lives to law enforcement than we lost American soldiers in both wars. How can that possibly be? Where's the media exposing that? Why isn't that statistic on the front of every major newspaper in the nation? Why isn't it on the forefront of every television news broadcast? Why? The raids on innocent people who were not guilty of anything. The raids were in large part, many of them were killed, is just staggering. This map has the wherewithal and the ability for you to search for raids on innocent suspects, the death or the injury of a police officer. And by the way, I got to tell you, they're a lot less, I know they want you to believe that, law enforcement officers put their lives on the line every day. I don't disagree with that. But I got to tell you, the risk of being killed as a law enforcement officer versus the risk of being killed as a civilian is not even close. And the numbers are so disparate that there's no way that you can conceivably believe that they're at greater risk than you. I mean, what are we talking? In the last 20 years, 20, 30, 40 officers killed? We're talking about thousands of Americans killed. Innocent Americans. If you're going to kick in the door of an American home, then I've got to tell you, you're going to have to expect to get shot. The article Cops or Soldiers from The Economist ought to wake every American up. In fact, the flags on the play should be so thick it's like confetti at the Super Bowl. Here's the way the article starts. From the way police entered the house, helmeted and masked, guns drawn and shields in front, knocking down the door with a battering ram and rushing inside, you might think they were raiding a den of armed criminals. In fact, they were looking for $1,000 worth of clothes and electronics allegedly bought with a stolen credit card. They found none of these things, but they did arrest 2 people in the house on unrelated charges. I invite you to remember the community lockdown of Boston, which was, for all intents and purposes, a practice run at how gullible will these peasants be. Your homes were raided. You were removed from your home at gunpoint because of the risk that one guy might have been somewhere in the community, somewhere in the city of Boston. The homeowner's son in this case was a disabled ex-service guy. He reached for his legal gun, and he heard the police announce themselves, and he reholstered it. Otherwise, he would have probably been dead. See, the truth of the matter is, Bradley Balco, by the way, is one of the guys that I've talked often about his book called Overkill, The Rise of Paramilitary Police Raids in America. Now, that's a book that's been out for years. And in the back of it, he's got hundreds and hundreds of examples of how law enforcement has, for all intents and purposes, become a danger, an exigent danger, to the average American citizen. We're not talking here about, being pulled over and being abused by a cop who says, you question my authority and I'll write you 3 tickets instead of 1. We're talking about officers who are kicking in doors in people's homes, who are conducting illegal searches on the side of the road, who are, I can't even go in to describe the total number of traffic abuses that have been happening where you've had law enforcement that because a guy was allegedly clenching his buttocks, they took him to a hospital where they probed him 8 times anally and found nothing. 8 times. At what point after the first or second probe do you say, well, maybe there's nothing there? Another woman, 6 times. They made her defecate while they watched. Cameras. What the heck is going on in our country? That we would allow this. By the way, the guy from New Mexico who was probed 8 times anally just received an award of $1.6 million. But that's small comfort to him because his life will never be the same. And I have to be honest, it's small comfort for the rest of us because law enforcement in cities and departments have, they are utilizing the laws of confiscation and forfeiture to fund this and also fund the lawsuits that inevitably will come. They don't care because they're giving back the money that they forfeited from other private individuals. The concept of forfeiture combined with the paramilitary law enforcement group, combined with the total number of American civilians who were killed innocently by law enforcement while they pursue a suspect who's guilty of what? Tell me how $1,000 worth of stolen credit card crap in somebody's house is worth the life of an innocent. Tell me. Give me the justification for that. Give it to me. Find it for me. If you can find it anywhere in the putrid morass of evil that has become what we term law enforcement today, I'll pay you. But you can't. The American police are now soldiers. You can disagree if you want to utilize the traditional definition of a soldier in the sense of their support and logistic support from the back and that kind of thing. But the equipment's the same. The mentality is the same. The mindset's the same. What's different What's different is the victims. And what's different is the difference in what their jobs should be versus what they actually are. So let's clarify for you the difference, in case you've forgotten. When you are a soldier, your job is to completely, totally, and utterly annihilate your enemy with any means necessary to accomplish the task. You have no concern for human rights and civil rights. You are there to accomplish a job, and in the event that you feel threatened, civilians who die would be construed as collateral damage. You can sit there and give me all of the Geneva Convention crap you want, but the truth of the matter is that's what happens. Now, in civilian law enforcement, one, you have to recognize that the vast majority of Americans are not subjected to this kind of treatment because they're not guilty of anything. They haven't even been accused of anything. There is a certain element of this nation that is dangerous, and when you talk about an individual who is dangerous to the remainder of society, additional leeway is allowed with that individual. But when you talk about a kid with 3 joints in his sock, when you talk about serving a warrant on someone who didn't show up for a DUI hearing at court, it does not justify the wholesale violation of their rights and everyone within their community, if you will, within their circle. It doesn't justify the violation of the rights of the homeowner when the police come in and sees something that, some drug, say, and the guy's got, 5 baggies, not one, and then they say, aha, you're a drug dealer. And then they confiscate his mother's house because it is construed to be, what? Proceeds of the criminal activity. Ladies and gentlemen, if you call that an American principle, I call you a traitor. And I'm telling you, this isn't this hasn't happened 5 times, this hasn't happened 50 times, or even 500 times. This has happened more than 5,000 times. In fact, the numbers are so dangerous that the numbers are well over 50,000. In fact, they may well be approaching 5 million. Forfeiture combined with extensive and abusive force are combined with the mentality that you're all guilty, we just haven't figured out what for yet, is the end of America as you know it. And the empowerment of these people, while simultaneously they are, every time they get away with it, they're empowered more and more and more. Check the mentality of entitlement that is in the average cop's mind. Go and talk to a friend of yours and look at and ask them what they think of the average citizen. They construe you as scumbags. Yes, all of us. They just haven't figured out what we're guilty of yet. But we're all guilty of something. They may not know exactly what yet, but it's just a matter of time until they figure it out. The truth is that if you were to give a fair and level test, psychiatric test, to the vast majority of police in the country, I suspect that most of them would fail. Did they go into law enforcement for the right reasons? Certainly a certain number of them did. And certainly there are good police. But when you have instances where where every time they pull someone over, they feel entitled and empowered to abuse that individual, when they're not given the training that says your first and foremost job is not to find crimes that you can prosecute, but to make sure that you are protecting the lives, the property, and the rights of the citizens of the country. Even when that means you've got to miss a bust, then we have a problem. We have a major disconnect. And at this point, it's not a major disconnect. It's a complete and utter pandemic. Every little community, every little town has a SWAT team. The DHS is pumping fully automatic weapons and weapons of war into the hands of law enforcement, who are, quite frankly, untrained in their capabilities, untrained in the issues that would protect the citizenry and the civilians that are supposed to be in their care. In fact, the only training they get is what they got to do to make the bust happen. I've talked to many people in law enforcement. Some of them actually get angry at me for my position on this. But many of them also, in fact, the majority of them support what I talk about. I know that there were certain groups that will disagree with it and wholesale. But even cops know that there is a element within their own blue circle that is completely, totally, and utterly out of control. And I'm going to throw this out because it needs to be said. If you're a cop and you are not exposing this kind of activity on the part of your, and when I say this kind of activity, I mean everything from the unconstitutional road stop to the unconstitutional search to the unconstitutional violation of individuals' rights to the physical search of people on the side of the road to the invasion of people's homes, to the lies on the witness stand to get that conviction, even if it's a little white lie, to the pressuring of witnesses, to the deal making. If you're not exposing this in your own department, then you're a part of the problem. Just like every Muslim who goes to a mosque and knows for a fact that Muhammad so-and-so has been plotting a bomb and doesn't speak up is guilty of the deaths of those people who die by it. And we here in the United States constantly say one of the reasons that Muslims as a general group are labeled together is because the good ones won't stand up and point out the bad ones. If you're in a Christian church and one of your congregation says and makes it clear to other members of the congregation that he intends on committing murder against someone who runs an abortion clinic, you, by not speaking out and stopping it, are just as guilty of the murder. And you in law enforcement are no different. There is no separation here. If you are condoning, protecting, or making sure that that individual is covered, even though you are not participating, then you are guilty yourself. You're guilty of the conspiracy, the aiding and the abetting. The same thing that you're charging people with. If you're in law enforcement and you withhold evidence that you know is exculpatory, if you are in law enforcement and you manufacture evidence, if you lie to someone in an effort to get them to confess to something, then you're a participant. The guy who guarded the prison gate, the guy who guards the gulag and is willing to shoot the prisoner who escapes in Soviet Russia, current and past, the guy who ran the separation of the goods that were stolen from the Jews who lined up and the 6 million other non-Jews who lined up in the concentration camps and sorted out the gold from the clothing, from the personal property. He's just as guilty as the murderer who stood there with a pistol and shot them in the back of the head or dropped in the gas. There is no difference. You cannot draw a moral separation. You can try. You can give yourself all the justification you want. But I guarantee you, in either this life or the next, you will have to answer for that. Somehow or other, and I don't care whether you believe in a Bible or you believe in karma, somewhere there is an intelligent creator that is going to make all of us, at some way, shape, or form, respond for how we've done. You cannot be in law enforcement, and you cannot say to me that what's happening in your industry, what's happening in your very, very limited role is acceptable or allowable. Any more than I can sit here and justify that, hey, I didn't rob the bank. All I did was count the money at the end. You would construe that to be a conspiracy, aiding and abetting in the robbery of the bank. You would construe it to be an accessory by saying, I didn't stop a murder that I knew was going to happen. I could be charged for that. It's a physical crime. How many people came out and said, after Newtown, that the mother was guilty for not doing something about what she knew to be a dangerous son? And I throw the same accusation on you as law enforcement. If you have refused to stand up and stop this activity, knowing full well what's happening, who's responsible for it, and who's guilty of it, and you have kept silent, participated, or covered it up, then you are no different. The blood is on your hands as well. Don't try and tell me that you didn't do it, so you're not guilty. You know, we didn't allow that kind of self-protection by justification in Nuremberg for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And I got to tell you, the difference between what happened there and what's happening here, when you kill innocents, there is none. There is no difference whatsoever. None whatsoever. When we talk about the deaths of people who, frankly, are not involved in this criminal activity because they happen to be in the way. And what you were really there for was, to bust some guy who's, selling a couple of joints, or I don't care if he's selling methamphetamine. It doesn't give you the right to kill innocent people. And the truth of the matter is, I'll tell you why cops will not go and get people in a place where they could get them alone. They want to get them in the house because that's how they get the forfeiture for the money and the assets and the cash and the property. They don't want to bust him as he's walking out of a quick stop with a bag of dope in his pocket, because there they can't get and they cannot seize and forfeit his assets. So they get him at home. And they use the justification that he can flush the drugs. Well, he can't flush the drugs when he's walking out of the 7-Eleven, can he? And you've had him under observation for months, so why don't you get him that way? It's the same reason that they didn't get what's-his-name out of Waco when they had him when they saw him in town all the time. They wanted him in his compound. And they didn't care who they had to kill to get it, including dozens of children. America, the paramilitary destruction that is being fostered on America is an act of treason, and it's an act of war. And it's not going to be long before this blows up in all our faces. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. You can email me directly at mike@americasvoicenow.org. If you're a police officer and you'd like to discuss this with me, send me an email, mike@americasvoicenow.org. We'll see you tomorrow.